legend, this portrait captures the matriarch at the height of her power.
Yeah.
Her influence extended far beyond these walls.
James Carter thought he knew everything about his wife Elena. But when he delivered a package to tech billionaire Marcus Sterling's Beverly Hills estate and saw a photograph on the mahogany desk, his world shattered. The girl in that silver frame, with those unmistakable eyes and the small scar above her left eyebrow, was Elena, his wife, in a billionaire's private study. What James didn't know was that this photograph held a secret 25 years in the making. A secret about murder, kidnapping, and a stolen identity. A secret that would lead him into a conspiracy so deep, it would change everything he thought he knew about the woman he married. This is the story of how one delivery, one photograph, and one man's determination to find the truth would bring justice to a case the world had forgotten. To enjoy the story, watch it from beginning to end. If you're hooked by this story of shocking secrets and hidden identities, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our daily stories of justice, betrayal, and unbelievable twists. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love hearing from you. New stories every single day that will leave you speechless. James Carter was 32 years old and worked as a software technician for a tech support company in Los Angeles, earning about $48,000 a year. Not wealthy, but enough for the modest condo he shared with his wife Elena in Pasadena. They'd been married for 6 years, and James believed they had no secrets. Elena worked as a financial analyst for a small investment firm. The mansion in Beverly Hills wasn't his usual service call. James had picked up an emergency shift covering for a colleague who normally handled premium residential clients. When he drove his company van through the iron gates of the Sterling estate, he entered another world entirely. The main house sprawled across at least 20,000 square feet of modern architecture and glass, overlooking the city. This was real wealth, the kind that made his monthly rent seem insignificant. Marcus Sterling, the tech billionaire who owned the estate, had called about networking issues worth thousands in potential downtime. A housekeeper led James through a marble foyer into a home office where Mr. Sterling would meet him. That's when James's world stopped. The photograph sat in an ornate silver frame on the mahogany desk, not hidden, but displayed prominently. James recognized the woman immediately, though she looked younger, perhaps 16 or 17. But those eyes, that smile, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident, unmistakable. It was Elena, his wife, in Marcus Sterling's private office. James's hands went numb. His equipment bag slipped before he caught it, the movement jerking him back to reality. His mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. An affair? But Elena had never mentioned knowing anyone wealthy. She'd never shown signs of infidelity. Just set up over there. Marcus Sterling entered the office, barely glancing at James. The billionaire was in his late 50s, silver-haired with the commanding presence that came from decades of success. He wore casual clothes that probably cost more than James made in a month. James set down his equipment with shaking hands. He knew he should stay professional, get the signature, complete the job. But his eyes kept drifting back to that photograph. Is there a problem? Marcus's tone carried impatience. That photo, James heard himself say. The woman in the silver frame. Where did you get it? Marcus's expression shifted. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe recognition. That's personal. Why do you ask? Because that's my wife. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus stared at James for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he moved to his desk, picked up the frame, and studied it as if seeing it for the first time in years. Your wife, Marcus repeated slowly. What's her name? Elena. Elena Carter. She was Elena Morales before we married. Marcus set the frame down carefully. I think you should leave. Not until you tell me why you have her photo. I don't owe you explanations. You're here to fix my network, nothing more. Marcus pulled out his phone. If you don't leave immediately, I'll call security. James wanted to argue, to demand answers, But he recognized the futility. Men like Marcus Sterling didn't explain themselves to people like him. He grabbed his equipment, left the work order and signed, and departed. But as he drove back toward Pasadena, his mind wouldn't stop spinning. How did Marcus Sterling know Elena? When had that photo been taken? The frame looked expensive, antique, the kind of thing you'd use for someone important to you. Not a casual acquaintance. James knew something they didn't. He wasn't going to let this go. Elena was working late when James got home that evening. He sat in their small living room, the television playing to an empty room, trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't understand. Elena had always been somewhat mysterious about her past. She'd been adopted at 17 after spending most of her childhood in foster care. Her adoptive parents, the Morales family, were good people who'd passed away in a car accident 3 years ago. Elena rarely talked about her time before the adoption, always saying it was too painful, too complicated. James had respected that. Everyone had parts of their past they didn't want to examine. But now that silence felt different, suspicious. When Elena finally came home around 9 p.m., James was still sitting in the same spot. She kissed the top of his head, tired but smiling. "Long day?" she asked, heading to the kitchen. "You could say that." James followed her. "Elena, do you know a man named Marcus Sterling?" He watched her face carefully, looking for recognition, guilt, anything. But Elena just looked confused as she poured a glass of water. "Marcus Sterling, the tech guy? I mean, I know who he is from the news, but I don't know him personally." "Why?" She seemed genuinely puzzled. James wanted to believe her, but he'd seen that photo. "I had a service call at his house today. He had a photograph of you on his desk." Elena's glass stopped halfway to her lips. "What? That doesn't make any sense." "That's what I thought. But it was definitely you. Younger, maybe 16 or 17, but unmistakably you." "James, that's impossible. I've never even met the man." But something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, confusion, maybe even worry. "Are you sure it was me? The scar above your eyebrow. Your eyes. I'd know you anywhere, Elena." She set down the glass and pulled out her phone. After searching for a moment, she showed him the screen, a recent photo of Marcus Sterling at some charity event. "This is him." James nodded. Elena stared at the photo for a long moment. "I've never seen him before in my life," she said quietly. "I swear to you, James. I don't know why he'd have my picture." James wanted to believe her. In 6 years of marriage, Elena had never given him reason to doubt. But the evidence was there, unexplained and unsettling. Over the next week, James couldn't let it go. He started noticing things he'd previously overlooked. Elena's phone habits, her schedule, the occasional expensive item that appeared. A designer bag she'd claimed was a gift from a colleague, a necklace she said she'd found at a consignment store. He hated himself for the suspicion, hated checking her phone when she was in the shower. But he found nothing incriminating, just normal conversations with coworkers and friends. Nothing about Marcus Sterling, nothing secret. Then on a Saturday in early December, everything changed again. James was grabbing coffee from their usual spot when he saw them. Elena and a man he didn't recognize, sitting at a corner table. They weren't touching, weren't doing anything obviously inappropriate, but there was an intimacy to their conversation that made James's stomach drop. The man was well dressed, expensive suit, polished shoes. He slid a manila envelope across the table to Elena. James ducked behind a newspaper rack, his heart pounding. He watched as Elena opened the envelope and pulled out what looked like documents. Her hand went to her mouth. She looked shocked, maybe even scared. The man reached across and squeezed her hand, said something James couldn't hear. Elena nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. James left before they could see him. He walked home in a daze. When Elena came home 2 hours later, she was quiet, distant. She claimed she'd been shopping, but had no bags to show for it. "Everything okay?" James asked, trying to sound casual. Yeah, fine. Just tired. But she wouldn't meet his eyes. That night, James lay awake long after Elena had fallen asleep. The pieces didn't fit together, but they formed a picture he didn't want to see. A wealthy billionaire with her photo. Secret meetings with well-dressed men. Expensive gifts with vague explanations. Elena's mysterious past that she never wanted to discuss. James had grown up working class in San Diego. His parents owned a small auto repair shop, working 70-hour weeks to keep him fed and in decent schools. He'd learned young that the world wasn't fair, that people like him had to work twice as hard for half as much. But he'd also learned to trust his instincts. And right now, every instinct screamed that something was wrong. The following Monday, James did something he'd never imagined himself capable of. He called in sick to work and drove back to Beverly Hills, parking down the street from the Sterling estate. He didn't have a plan exactly, just a desperate need for answers. He'd been sitting there for 20 minutes when a black Mercedes sedan pulled through the gates. Through his windshield, James could make out the driver, the same well-dressed man from the cafe who'd given Elena that envelope. James's hands clenched on the steering wheel. Whatever was happening involved Marcus Sterling, that mysterious man, and his wife. And James was going to find out what it was. He spent the next 3 days digging into Marcus Sterling's background. Sterling had made his billions in cybersecurity software in the early 2000s, then diversified into artificial intelligence and cloud computing. Divorced twice, no children according to public records. Philanthropist, political donor, nothing that explained his connection to Elena. James had also tracked the mysterious man from the cafe, following him from another meeting with Elena. Yes, there had been another meeting, to a downtown office building. The directory listed him as Robert Chen, attorney at law. Not just any attorney. He specialized in estate planning and family law for high-net-worth clients. The pieces still didn't fit, but they all pointed back to Marcus Sterling. Elena had been acting stranger by the day. More distracted, more secretive. She'd started taking calls in the other room, her voice low and urgent. When James asked about it, she claimed it was work stress. But Elena had never been a good liar. On Thursday evening, James made a decision. He found Marcus Sterling's business headquarters address in downtown Los Angeles. The next morning, he called in sick again and took the train into the city. The building was one of those glass towers, all steel and modern art in the lobby. James felt out of place in his regular jeans and jacket, surrounded by people in $1,000 suits. But he made it past security with a lie about having an appointment, then found his way to the 38th floor where Sterling Technologies occupied the entire level. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s, smiled professionally. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I need to speak with Mr. Sterling. It's urgent. Personal. I'm afraid Mr. Sterling doesn't take unscheduled meetings. Tell him it's about Elena Morales. Tell him the tech guy from last month needs 5 minutes of his time." The receptionist's expression flickered. She picked up her phone, spoke quietly, then looked at James with new interest. "Mr. Sterling will see you. But you have 10 minutes, not 5. James was ushered through a maze of glass-walled offices to a corner suite with sweeping views of the city. Marcus Sterling stood by the window, his back to the door. When he turned, his expression was guarded. "Mr. Carter. I wondered if you'd show up here eventually. You know my name." "I know a great many things, Mr. Carter. Sit. We have matters to discuss." Marcus gestured to a leather chair, then settled behind his desk. That same silver-framed photograph sat in the corner, Elena's young face smiling out at them both. "You want to know about that picture?" "I want to know what you're doing with my wife." "I'm not doing anything with your wife." Marcus's tone was measured, careful. "Though I understand why you'd think otherwise. But before you make accusations, Mr. Carter, you need to hear the truth. And I promise you, it's nothing like what you're imagining." Marcus Sterling studied James for a long moment, then opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the desk. Before you look at that, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but it's the truth. And I have documentation to prove every word. James opened the folder. Inside were photographs, old ones from what looked like the 1980s or early 90s. A young couple with a small child. The woman had Elena's eyes. The man had her smile. 25 years ago, Marcus said quietly, my younger brother Daniel and his wife Catherine died in a house fire in San Francisco. Their daughter was never found. The authorities assumed she'd perished in the blaze, but no remains were ever recovered. The case went cold. James looked up sharply. What are you saying? I'm saying that 2 months ago, I hired a private investigator to take one more look at that cold case. 25 years is a long time, but new forensic techniques, new databases. I wanted closure. What I found instead was evidence that my niece didn't die in that fire. She was taken. The room felt like it was tilting. James gripped the edge of the desk. That photo on my desk, Marcus continued, was taken 6 months after my brother's death by a security camera at a bus station in Oakland. A man was traveling with a girl matching my niece's description. The police couldn't identify them then, couldn't track them. But with modern facial recognition software, my investigator traced that girl through various foster care records under different names. Marcus pulled out more documents. She was moved around constantly. Her identity changed multiple times. Until finally, at age 17, she was adopted by a couple named Morales in Pasadena. No, James whispered. But even as he said it, pieces were falling into place. Elena's mysterious past. Her lack of family. The way she'd always said her early childhood was too painful to remember. I had DNA analysis done, Marcus said gently. From Elena's medical records, nothing invasive or illegal, just samples from routine blood work that medical labs keep on file. The match is conclusive, Mr. Carter. Elena Morales, your wife, is Sarah Sterling. My brother's daughter. My niece. James couldn't breathe. Does she know? Not yet. I wanted to be absolutely certain before approaching her. I wanted to understand her life, make sure that revealing this information wouldn't cause more harm than good. Marcus's expression softened. I've been having her watched, Mr. Carter, not to spy, but to protect her and understand who she'd become. That's why I know about you, about your marriage, about the life you've built together. The lawyer, James managed. Robert Chen. He's preparing the documentation for when I finally tell her. There's a substantial trust fund, money her father left behind that's been growing for 25 years. There are properties, investments. None of that matters compared to the truth she deserves to know about her identity. James's mind was reeling. Elena wasn't having an affair. She wasn't betraying him. She was caught in the middle of something she didn't even know about yet. A past that had been stolen from her. A family she'd never known she had. Why didn't you just tell her? James asked. Because telling someone their entire childhood was a lie, that they were kidnapped and had their identity erased, that they have an uncle they never knew existed, that's not a conversation you rush into. I needed to be sure. I needed to be prepared to support her through whatever came next. Marcus's voice carried genuine pain. I lost my brother and his wife. I thought I'd lost Sarah too. Finding out she's alive, that she's been living just a few miles away all this time, it's a miracle and a tragedy all at once. Someone took her, James said, the implications sinking in. Someone deliberately separated her from her family. Yes. And I intend to find out who and why. But first, Elena needs to know the truth. And I think that conversation needs to happen with you there. She'll need you, Mr. Carter. This is going to turn her world upside down. James looked down at the photographs in the folder. A little girl who would grow up to be his wife. A brother who would never see his daughter again. A family destroyed by fire and secrets. When? He asked. Tomorrow. If you're willing. Robert Chen will be there with all the legal documentation. Medical records, DNA results, everything she'll need to verify what I'm telling her. James drove home in a fog, his mind struggling to process everything Marcus Sterling had told him. Sarah Sterling. His wife had been someone else entirely before she became Elena Morales. Kidnapped at age 4. Her identity erased. Her entire childhood stolen. How did you even begin to explain something like that? When he walked into their condo, Elena was cooking dinner. The normalcy of it, her humming along to music, the smell of garlic and onions, the life they'd built together, felt both precious and fragile. "Hey you," she said, smiling. "How was your day? We need to talk." James set his keys down carefully. "Can you turn off the stove and sit down?" The smile faded from Elena's face. "James, you're scaring me." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think so. But something's happened, and I need you to listen to everything before you react." They sat at their small kitchen table. Elena's hand found his across the surface. "I went to see Marcus Sterling today," James began. "I demanded to know why he had your photograph." Elena's eyes widened. "James, what? Let me finish. Please." He squeezed her hand. "He told me something that sounds impossible, but he has proof. DNA evidence, photographs, medical records. Elena, your real name is Sarah Sterling. You're his niece. 25 years ago, you were taken from your family after your parents died in a fire. Someone kidnapped you and put you into foster care under a false identity." The color drained from Elena's face. For a long moment, she just stared at him, unable to form words. "That's insane," she finally whispered. "That's not. I mean, I was in foster care, but that's because my parents abandoned me. That's what they told me. Because someone made sure no one could find you. They changed your name, moved you between facilities, kept you hidden." James pulled out his phone, showed her the photos Marcus had given him. "This is your father, Marcus's brother. This is your mother. Look at them, Elena. Really look." Elena took the phone with shaking hands. She stared at the photograph of the young couple with their small daughter. Tears started streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "I have dreams sometimes," she said softly. "About a woman with dark hair who sang to me. About a house with a big backyard and a swing set. I always thought they were just fantasies, things I'd made up because I wanted a family so badly." She looked up at James, her face anguished. "Are you telling me those memories are real? Marcus wants to meet with you tomorrow. He has everything. Documents, DNA results, your family's history. He wants to give you back the truth about who you are." Elena stood abruptly, pacing their small kitchen. "This is crazy. People don't just get kidnapped and have their whole identity erased. That doesn't happen in real life." "It happened to you." James stood too, reaching for her. "I know it's overwhelming, but Elena, you have family. Real family. An uncle who's been looking for you, who thought you were dead for 25 years. Why?" Elena's voice cracked. "Why would someone do this? Why would they take me? That's what we need to find out. Will you meet with Marcus? Will you at least hear what he has to say?" Elena wrapped her arms around herself, looking lost and young. "I don't know if I can handle this. What if it's true? What if my whole life has been a lie?" James pulled her into his arms, feeling her shake against him. "Then we deal with it together, the same way we deal with everything. But you deserve to know the truth, Elena. You deserve to know who you really are." She was quiet for a long moment, her face buried against his chest. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Tomorrow. I'll meet him. But James, I'll be right there with you. I'm not going anywhere." That night, they lay in bed, neither of them able to sleep. Elena stared at the ceiling, her hand clasped in James's. "What if I'm not who I thought I was?" she asked quietly. "What if everything I believed about myself is wrong?" You're still you, James said firmly. You're still the woman I fell in love with. You're still the person who makes me laugh, who works harder than anyone I know, who never gives up. Finding out your name used to be different doesn't change any of that. Promise me something, Elena said. Promise me that no matter what we find out tomorrow, we don't let it destroy us. We don't let them take anything else from us. I promise, James said. And meant it. The next afternoon, they sat in Robert Chen's office, a neutral space that felt less intimidating than Marcus's corporate headquarters. The attorney was professional but kind, laying out documents on the conference table with careful precision. Marcus sat across from them, his expression a mix of hope and nervousness that made him seem more human than the commanding billionaire James had first encountered. Ms. Morales. Or Ms. Sterling if you prefer, Marcus began. I want to start by saying how sorry I am. Sorry for your loss. Sorry for the years you spent alone. Sorry for approaching this in a way that may have seemed secretive or frightening. Elena's hand found James's under the table, gripping tight. Just tell me what you know. For the next hour, Marcus laid it all out. His brother Daniel and sister-in-law Catherine had died on March 15, 1999, when their house in San Francisco burned down. Their daughter Sarah, age 4, was presumed dead. But no body was ever found, and the fire investigation had been oddly incomplete. I was living in Seattle at the time, building my company, Marcus explained, his voice heavy with old regret. I flew back for the funeral, tried to get answers, but the case went cold within months. I blame myself for not being there, for not pushing harder. Robert Chen slid a DNA report across the table. This confirms with 99.9% certainty that you share approximately 25% of your DNA with Mr. Sterling, consistent with an avuncular relationship. You are Sarah Sterling. Elena stared at the document, her hands trembling. Who took me? Where have they been all this time? That's what I've spent the last 2 months trying to find out, Marcus said. And 3 days ago, my investigator finally found the answer. It's not pleasant. He pulled out another file, this one thicker. Your father worked as a financial analyst for a venture capital firm called Redstone Partners. In early 1999, he discovered that the firm's founder, Gerald Vance, was running a massive Ponzi scheme. Millions of dollars stolen from investors, most of them retirees who trusted Vance with their life savings. James felt Elena tense beside him. My father knew about it, she said quietly. Marcus nodded. He was going to expose it. He compiled evidence, contacted federal investigators, was planning to testify. But before he could, the fire happened. Gerald Vance's brother-in-law was a fire inspector, Marcus continued, his jaw tight. The investigation was deliberately botched. And Gerald's sister, a woman named Patricia Lawson, worked for the state's Child Protective Services. The implications hit James like a physical blow. They took her to keep her as leverage. That's my investigator's theory. With Sarah alive somewhere, Daniel's evidence might have seemed less credible, a grief-stricken brother making accusations, unable to even protect his own family. And if Daniel had left any additional documentation, any insurance policy, they'd need Sarah alive to potentially access it. Marcus looked at Elena with profound sadness. You weren't killed because you were more valuable alive, a ghost that could be controlled if needed. But they never needed me, Elena whispered. Because my father died before he could expose them. Yes. So you were simply discarded into the foster system under a false name. Moved around every year or two to keep you invisible. Patricia Lawson had the connections to make it all work, to bury your real identity so deep that no one would ever find it. Elena stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to all of them. James could see her shoulders shaking. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I remember being scared. Being in a car with a woman who said my parents were gone, that I needed to be quiet and good or bad things would happen. I remember foster homes, different names, people telling me to forget who I was before. She turned, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was going crazy. I thought those memories were nightmares. They were real, Marcus said gently. All of it was real. And I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. Where are they now? Elena's voice turned hard. Gerald Vance and Patricia Lawson. Where are the people who did this to me? Robert Chan cleared his throat. That's complicated. Gerald Vance's Ponzi scheme was eventually exposed in 2005, but by then the statute of limitations had passed on some charges. He served 12 years in federal prison for securities fraud. He was released in 2017 and has been living quietly in Arizona ever since. They got away with it, Elena said flatly. Not necessarily, Marcus said. New evidence, new testimony, new charges can still be filed. Murder has no statute of limitations. And now we have you. Proof that you survived. Proof of what they did. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena threw herself into piecing together her stolen past. Marcus opened his home to her, sharing photo albums and videos of her parents. She watched herself as a toddler, heard her father's laugh, saw her mother's smile. Each discovery was both a gift and a wound, glimpses of a life that had been ripped away. James watched her change. The woman he'd known, sweet, gentle Elena who worked quietly as a financial analyst and rarely made waves, was discovering a core of steel she'd never known she possessed. This was Sarah Sterling, daughter of a man who tried to do the right thing even when it cost him everything. Marcus had offered her access to the trust fund, nearly $7 million accumulated over 25 years. Elena had looked at the number and felt nothing. Money couldn't buy back her childhood or bring back her parents. But it could fund something else. Justice. I want to hire investigators, she told Marcus and James one evening in late December. They sat in Marcus's study, the same room where James had first seen her photograph. I want to find every piece of evidence that connects Vance and Lawson to what happened. I want it airtight. The family attorney already has people looking into it, Marcus said. But Elena, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that we can't prove everything. It's been 25 years. Evidence degrades. Witnesses die. Memories fade. Then we find what we can and we make it count. Elena's voice was steady. These people took everything from me. They don't get to just live out their retirement in peace. James had never been prouder of her, or more worried. Elena, this is going to be hard. Going up against people like that, reliving everything. I know. But I need to do this, James. I need them to know that Sarah Sterling didn't disappear. That they failed to erase me. She took his hand. I need you to understand why this matters. I do understand. And I'm with you. Whatever you need. What they needed, it turned out, was a small miracle. And they got it from an unexpected source. In mid-January, Marcus's head investigator, a former federal agent named Victoria Ross, requested an urgent meeting. She arrived at the condo with a laptop and an expression James couldn't quite read. I found someone, Victoria said without preamble. Someone who worked for Gerald Vance in 1999. His name is Dennis Hartwell, and he's dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Maybe 3 months left. He's decided he wants to clear his conscience before he goes. Elena leaned forward. He knows something. He knows everything. He was Vance's right-hand man. Helped him run the Ponzi scheme. He was there the night they planned the fire. Victoria opened her laptop and turned it so they could see. He's willing to give a formal deposition. He'll testify to everything. The scheme, the murder, the kidnapping. He says he's lived with the guilt for 25 years and he wants to make it right before he dies. James felt Elena's hand tighten in his. Why now? She asked. Why come forward after all this time? He has grandchildren. Says he can't die knowing they might someday learn what he did and think he was a monster. He wants to do one decent thing before the end. Victoria's expression softened. I know it's not much of a redemption, but his testimony could be the key to everything. Within days, Dennis Hartwell gave a videotaped deposition that laid out the entire conspiracy. He described how Gerald Vance had panicked when Daniel Sterling discovered the fraud, how they'd planned to make it look like an accident, how Patricia Lawson, Vance's sister, had suggested taking the child instead of killing her. Leverage, insurance, a way to muddy the waters if Daniel had left behind evidence. "We told ourselves we were saving her," Hartwell said on the tape, his voice weak and raspy, "that she'd have a better life than being orphaned. But the truth is, we were monsters. We took that little girl and threw her into the system like she was garbage." Elena watched the deposition with tears streaming down her face. Beside her, James held her hand while Marcus sat stone-faced, his jaw tight with rage. "That's enough," Robertson said, pausing the video. "We have what we need. With this testimony, we can move forward." "Move forward how?" Elena asked. "Criminal charges against Gerald Vance and Patricia Lawson for conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, child endangerment, and fraud. The district attorney will need to review everything, but with Hartwell's testimony and the supporting evidence we've gathered, we have a strong case." Elena nodded slowly. "I want to be there. When they're arrested. I want them to see my face and know they failed." Victoria Ross smiled grimly. "I think that can be arranged." The arrests happened on a cold morning in February. James took the day off work to be with Elena when the news broke. They watched from Marcus's penthouse as news helicopters circled Patricia Lawson's daughter's house in Orange County, where the elderly woman had been staying. Police led her out in handcuffs, her face shocked and pale. In Arizona, Gerald Vance's arrest was less dramatic but more satisfying. He'd been having breakfast at a country club when federal agents arrived. News cameras caught him trying to maintain his dignity as he was escorted past stunned fellow members. By evening, every major news outlet was covering the story. The case had everything: murder, conspiracy, a child stolen and lost for decades, and finally, justice. Elena watched it all with an expression James couldn't quite read. Not satisfaction exactly. More like exhaustion mixed with grim determination. "It's not over," she said quietly. "The trial will take months, maybe years. They'll fight it. They'll try to discredit Hartwell's MO. Continue. Testimony. Let them fight," Marcus said, joining them at the penthouse. "We have the truth on our side. And we have something they took away 25 years ago. We have Sarah Sterling, alive and ready to face them." The trial began on the first Monday in June in a federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. James took a leave of absence from his job. Marcus had offered to cover their expenses, and for once, Elena had accepted. This was more important than pride. The courtroom was packed. Elena sat in the front row with James on one side and Marcus on the other, a united front. Across the aisle, Gerald Vance sat with his expensive defense team, looking older than his 73 years but still carrying himself with arrogance. Patricia Lawson, 76 and frail-looking, sat separately with her own attorney. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Walsh was sharp and relentless. In her opening statement, she laid out the case methodically. Daniel Sterling's discovery of the Ponzi scheme, his intention to report it, the convenient fire that killed him and his wife, and the daughter who disappeared without a trace. "Sarah Sterling didn't die in that fire," Walsh told the jury. "She was taken deliberately, systematically, by people who saw a 4-year-old child not as a human being but as a loose end to be managed. And for 25 years, they thought they'd gotten away with it. But Sarah Sterling is here today, alive and ready to tell you what they did to her." The defense's strategy became clear quickly. They'd argue that Dennis Hartwell's testimony was unreliable, a dying man's delusions, motivated by medication and guilt over unrelated crimes. They'd claim the fire had been a tragic accident, that Sarah's disappearance into foster care was a bureaucratic failure, not kidnapping. "My client is 73 years old," Gerald Vance's attorney argued. "He served his time for securities fraud, crimes he deeply regrets. But he is not a murderer. He is not a kidnapper. and the prosecution's case rests entirely on the word of a convicted felon who waited until he was literally on his deathbed to suddenly remember this elaborate conspiracy. But the prosecution had more than Dennis Hartwell's testimony. On the third day of trial, Rebecca Walsh called Dr. Michael Chen, a forensic analyst who'd reviewed the original fire investigation. He testified that the fire's point of origin and burn patterns were consistent with arson, not an electrical fault as the original report claimed. More damning, he identified 3 significant omissions in the original fire inspector's work, omissions that any competent investigator would have noticed. This wasn't incompetence, Dr. Chen stated. This was deliberate falsification designed to support a predetermined conclusion. The defense tried to argue that mistakes happen, that second-guessing a 25-year-old investigation was unfair. But Walsh was ready. She produced financial records showing a $50,000 deposit into the fire inspector's account 2 weeks after the blaze. Money that came from a shell corporation later tied to Gerald Vance's network of fraudulent entities. James watched Elena's face as the evidence mounted. She sat perfectly still, her expression composed, but he could see the toll it was taking. The tightness around her eyes, the way her hands clenched in her lap. On the 5th day, Elena took the stand. Rebecca Walsh guided her through her testimony gently but thoroughly. Elena described her fragmented memories of that night, being taken by a woman who said her parents were gone, the terror of not understanding what was happening. She spoke about the years in foster care, the constant moves, the feeling of being erased. They told me different stories about where I came from, Elena said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Sometimes I was abandoned. Sometimes I was found wandering. The details always changed. I grew up thinking I was nobody, that I didn't matter enough for anyone to keep track of my story. And when did you learn the truth? Walsh asked. 4 months ago. When my husband discovered my photograph in my uncle's home. When I learned that I wasn't nobody. I was Sarah Sterling, and I had parents who loved me and an uncle who never stopped looking for me. The defense's cross-examination was brutal. They tried to suggest Elena's memories were false, implanted by suggestion and the desire to believe Marcus's story. They pointed out inconsistencies in her recollections, dates that didn't quite line up, details that seemed too vague. Isn't it true, Ms. Sterling, Vance's attorney pressed, that you have no actual memory of being taken as you claim? That your earliest clear memories are from age 6 or 7 in foster care? My earliest clear memories are from that age, Elena agreed. But I have fragments from before. Images, feelings, moments. And they match what actually happened. They match the truth. Or they match what you've been told happened. What you want to believe happened because it gives your difficult childhood a narrative that makes you the victim of a conspiracy rather than the victim of ordinary tragedy. James saw Elena's jaw tighten, but her voice remained calm. I am the victim of a conspiracy. The evidence proves that. And nothing you say can change what they did to me. The trial's turning point came in the 2nd week when Patricia Lawson's attorney made a calculated move. Seeing the evidence mounting against his client, he approached the prosecution with an offer. Patricia would testify against Gerald Vance in exchange for a reduced sentence. The courtroom was electric the day Patricia Lawson took the stand. She looked smaller than she had during her arrest, diminished by age and the weight of her crimes. But her memory was sharp, and her testimony was devastating. Gerald called me the day after Daniel Sterling contacted federal investigators, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He was panicking. He said Daniel had enough evidence to destroy everything, to send him to prison for decades. He asked if there was a way to make it stop. And what did you suggest? Rebecca Walsh asked. Nothing. Not at first. But then Gerald's brother-in-law, the fire inspector, suggested making it look like an accident. And Patricia's voice broke. I said if they went through with it, they needed to be careful about the child. That if she survived, she could be a complication later. What did Mr. Vance say to that? He said to take care of it. To make sure she disappeared but stayed alive in case they needed leverage, if Daniel had left evidence behind somewhere. Patricia looked at Elena for the first time, her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I told myself I was saving you by not letting them kill you too. But I know that's not true. I was just covering for their crime. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Elena sat frozen, staring at the woman who'd stolen her childhood. Under cross-examination, Patricia revealed more details. How she'd personally handled Sarah's case file, creating a false history and moving her between facilities to keep her invisible. How she'd checked on her periodically over the years, always from a distance, making sure she stayed lost in the system. Did you ever consider telling the truth? The prosecutor asked. Every day, Patricia said, her voice breaking. But I was afraid. Afraid of prison, afraid of what Gerald might do to me or my family if I talked. So I stayed quiet, and I let that little girl suffer for my cowardice. The defense tried to salvage something, suggesting Patricia was lying to save herself, that her testimony was self-serving. But the details matched too perfectly, with the evidence, with Elena's fragmented memories, with Dennis Hartwell's deposition. Gerald Vance's face was ashen as Patricia stepped down. His empire of lies was crumbling, and everyone could see it. The prosecution rested after 2 more days of witnesses, financial experts who traced the money, child welfare workers who confirmed the irregularities in Sarah's case. The defense put up a fight, but it was clearly a losing battle. Closing arguments took 2 days. The defense argued reasonable doubt, the unreliability of testimonies from criminals and the distant past. The prosecution laid out the timeline with devastating precision. Sarah Sterling was 4 years old, Rebecca Walsh told the jury in her final statement. 4 years old when these defendants decided her life was worth less than their freedom. They murdered her parents. They took her from her home. They erased her identity and threw her away. And they went on with their lives thinking they'd gotten away with it. But Sarah Sterling didn't disappear. She survived. She grew up. She built a life despite everything they did to her. And she's here today asking you to hold them accountable. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, James held Elena's hand so tightly his fingers went numb. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of kidnapping? Guilty. Every count. Every charge. Guilty. Gerald Vance sat motionless as the verdicts were read, his face blank. Patricia Lawson wept quietly, her shoulders shaking. Elena didn't react visibly. She just sat there, James's hand in hers, and breathed. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Gerald Vance received 25 years to life, effectively a death sentence for a 73-year-old man. Patricia Lawson, because of her cooperation, received 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10. Given her age and health, neither would likely die free. But the story didn't end with the sentencing. After the trial, Victoria Ross requested one final meeting. They gathered in Marcus's study, the same place where James had first learned the truth about Elena's identity. There's something you need to see, Victoria said, opening her laptop. She pulled up an old photograph. Daniel Sterling with another man, both young, in business suits. Daniel kept a safety deposit box that we only found last week. Inside was documentation of the Ponzi scheme, evidence he'd planned to give to the authorities. But there was also this. She handed Elena a letter, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. Elena's hands shook as she unfolded it. My dearest Sarah, she read aloud, her voice breaking. If you're reading this, it means something has happened to your mother and me. It means I wasn't able to protect you the way I should have. But know this. You are loved beyond measure. You are strong, brilliant, and kind. Everything your mother and I dreamed you would be. She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. I've discovered things at work that I cannot ignore. Bad people doing bad things that will hurt many innocent families. I have to stop it, even if it puts us in danger. Your Uncle Marcus will take care of you if anything happens to us. He loves you as much as we do. Never forget who you are, Sarah. You are a Sterling. You come from a line of people who stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it costs us everything. I hope you never have to read this. But if you do, know that your mother and I will always be with you. Proud of everything you become. All my love. Forever. Dad. Elena clutched the letter to her chest, sobbing. Marcus moved to her side, his own eyes wet. James wrapped his arms around her, holding her as 25 years of grief finally poured out. He knew, Elena whispered. He knew what might happen, and he did the right thing anyway. In the weeks that followed, Elena worked with victim services to locate other children who might have been similarly lost in the system due to Patricia Lawson's corruption. They found 3 cases that raised red flags: children with incomplete records, mysterious origins, families that had been searching for them. Elena also started working with Marcus's foundation, using her experience and her trust fund to reform foster care oversight in California. She testified before the state legislature, sharing her story and pushing for better tracking systems, more accountability, stronger protections for vulnerable children. James watched her transform. She was still his Elena, still the woman who hummed while cooking and left notes in his lunch. But she'd also become Sarah Sterling, heir to a legacy of courage and conviction. One evening in early August, they sat on their small balcony, watching the sunset over Pasadena. Elena had been quiet all day, thoughtful. "I've been thinking," she said suddenly, "about having kids. If we started a family, I want to tell them about my parents. About Daniel and Catherine and how they died trying to do the right thing. I want those kids to know where they come from." "I think that's beautiful," James said. "They'll have an incredible legacy to live up to. And they'll have you to teach them that heroism isn't about money or power. It's about showing up, telling the truth, and loving people even when it's complicated." Elena turned to look at him. "You're the hero of this story, James. You found that photograph. You pushed for answers. You refused to let it go. You gave me back my family." "We gave each other everything that matters," James corrected. "And we'll keep doing that through whatever comes next." 6 months later, James stood in Marcus's mansion, now a place he visited regularly, no longer intimidated by the wealth or setting, and watched Elena give a speech to a room full of philanthropists and child welfare advocates. She was confident, articulate, powerful. The woman who'd once been too scared to speak up at work meetings was now commanding the attention of some of the wealthiest and most influential people in California. When the speech ended, Marcus approached James with 2 glasses of champagne. "She's remarkable," Marcus said, watching Elena network with the crowd. "She always was," James replied. "The world just didn't know it yet. I'm glad she had you through all of this. You were her constant. That matters more than anything I could have given her." James clinked his glass against Marcus's. "She would have been fine without me. But I'm glad she didn't have to be." That night, back in their condo, they decided to stay in Pasadena despite numerous offers to help them relocate. Maria kicked off her heels and collapsed on the couch with a sigh. "Tired?" James asked. "Exhausted. But good exhausted." She patted the couch beside her. "Come here." James sat, and she immediately curled into his side the way she always did when she needed comfort or connection. "I was thinking today about what you asked me once," Elena said. "About who I would have been if none of this had happened. If I'd grown up as Sarah Sterling from the beginning. And I think I would have been happy, privileged, maybe a little spoiled." She smiled. "But I wouldn't have been as strong. I wouldn't have learned to survive, to rebuild, to find value in myself without external validation. And I wouldn't have met you." "You might have met someone better," James teased. "There is no one better. There's just you. The man who saw me when I was invisible, who loved me when I was nobody, who stood by me when I discovered I was somebody's daughter and niece and heir. You didn't care about any of that. You just cared about me." James kissed the top of her head. "That's all that ever mattered." "I learned something through all of this," Elena said softly. "Something I want to remember forever." That justice isn't just about punishment. It's about truth. It's about making sure people know what happened. That victims are seen and heard. That lies don't become the official story. My parents died trying to tell the truth. And in the end, the truth won. It took 25 years, but it won. She sat up, looking at him with those eyes that had stared out from a photograph in a billionaire's study and changed both their lives forever. And I learned that family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about the people who show up, who stand beside you when everything falls apart, who believe you even when the truth seems impossible. She took his hand. You're my family, James. You always will be. And you're mine, James said. Through everything. Forever. They sat together in their modest condo, surrounded by the life they'd built with their own hands. Outside, the city hummed with millions of other stories. Tragedies and triumphs, secrets and revelations, justice delayed but never denied. But inside, there was only truth. Only love. Only the quiet certainty that they'd faced the worst and come through stronger together. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming more than what those who wronged you ever imagined possible. It's taking what they meant to destroy and turning it into something beautiful, something true, something that matters. Sarah Sterling had been taken. Elena Morales had been lost. But the woman who emerged from those ashes was stronger than either name alone. She was herself, fully realized, finally free. And that was a kind of justice no verdict could ever match. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey. If you loved this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more amazing true crime and justice stories posted every single day. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. What did you think of Elena's story? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. I read every single one and love hearing from you. And if you know someone who would love this story, share it with them. Don't forget to check out my other videos in the playlist for more unbelievable stories of justice, betrayal, and redemption. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. ****